The Daniel Craig Bond continuity is a hot mess. There have been worse Bond movies before, but the attempt at serializing and self-mythologizing what was largely an episodic series made it into the most inconsistent era out of the entire Bond canon. It used to be that if there was a bad Bond movie, it was just one taint to the franchise. Now if a Bond movie is bad, then it smudges its sins onto others, and it will take half a decade and delays until the next installment will reinvent the entire thing and save or doom the franchise. Why is it so hard to make a Bond movie? How is it that every Bond production goes shitshow behind the scenes? Why are they overthinking it? There are no lawsuits or legal issues preventing them. 3 years have passed, and we don't even have any idea what's going on, let alone a peep from regarding what the next film is going to be or who the star will be. Are you telling me producing what should be episodic, standalone action films where a wisecracking super spy does cool stunts is way more difficult than an interconnected multi-character continuation of Marvel? During its peak, the Marvel Cinematic Universe pumped out 2 or 3 well-received blockbusters with the same stars and different genre flavors per year, while maintaining consistency to not derail the whole brand and planning 10 movies ahead to build up to a decade-long story arc. Paramount and Lionsgate made 3 or 4 better received, more impressive Mission Impossible and John Wick movies with a middle-aged star well past their prime doing practical stunts on location in the time since Spectre. And they are dealing with epic, overarching, complex storylines with the same main cast, while Bond doesn't. If anyone else was at the helm, they would be producing Moneypenny Diaries spin-offs by now. And I'd say it began with Skyfall. Yes, Quantum of Solace sucks, but the idea of continuing where Casino Royale left off and having Bond on a vengeful path isn't a bad idea in itself. Book You Only Lives Twice and Movie Diamonds are forever briefly tapped into that, and License to Kill exists, and that is considered one of the best Bond films. Resolving who Bond is and putting an end to his memories and regret for Vesper is an interesting premise. It's just that the execution was terrible. Skyfall is when the Craig films got screwy. Bond in Skyfall is boring and resembles nothing of his Casino Royale counterpart in his personality, completely lacking in humor and wits. Action set pieces except for the opening and the sniper fight are unexciting. While they are gorgeous to look at, they all lack the bombastic energy. And yes, that's the point. It's because he's out of his form. The intention is that this isn't a fun Bond movie, but a subversion of it. He is depressed, flailing, and alcoholic. But that's the problem. Why do that here? The 2 movies before were all about the prequels becoming Bond, and right in the next film he is too old and needs to be retired. Roger Moore was older than Craig in Skyfall when he was cast as James Bond. It's about Bond's failures. He keeps failing every single goal for over 2 hours. Yet the movie ends with James Bond is back and returns to the 00 status. He is immediately ready to get back to work.
I also just find narratively the film is torn between wanting to be this sort of brooding James Bond story where, the character faces hard times and has to deal with failure and loss, but also the film wants to be this aspirational and awesome action movie where Bond returns with triumphant awe. So it's a movie where Bond fails at everything for 2.5 hours and then has the gall to end with like, 007, are you ready to get back to work? With pleasure, M. And it's like, you didn't do anything right this entire movie. You didn't retrieve the list at the beginning, you didn't pass your training tests, you caught Silva, but that was just part of his plan, and you couldn't save Saravine, you couldn't save M, like you didn't succeed at a single task in this movie. So for it to turn around and have this sort of badass and awesome return to form ending, while it's kind of satisfying in the moment the first time you see it, it's ultimately pretty hollow, and the more I see this film, the more it just stands out as like this total disconnect from the story that precedes it.
If anything, it would make more sense if Bond retires from the 00 status. He lost people he cares about and acknowledged he is aging, failed everything. The story feels like it was written as a goodbye to the character, as a meta-finale to the series as a whole, yet it ends as a glorious return. Then Bond spends the next 2 films turning rogue and retiring again before they conclude his run.
Where's 007?
Even though Spectre was meant to be a farewell movie, it honestly felt like a new beginning. The new villain organization is introduced, Blofeld is introduced, Bond succeeds at capturing him, and his adventure depicts James Bond as his peak. He's humorous, charming, strong, and Bondian. Yet the film suddenly ends on a different note than all the other Bonds by sending him off to live happily with Madeline. What is the reason for him to retire now? Why introduce the ultimate villain and then just retire him? Spectre in particular is a dead horse, but it deserves another round of beating. I do not understand Sam Mendes' obsession with Bond's past and legacy, and it has gotten far worse with Spectre. Spectre fundamentally rubbed me in a way any other bad Bond flick has not. Die Another Day and Moonraker had a so bad it's good quality, but watching Spectre just oppressed me. I was in utter disbelief as to how any producer in their right mind thought the Blofeld was a good idea. They just retconned everything when they made Spectre and linked all of the films together. All of a sudden, Lou Schiffer, Dominique Green, and Silva are all Spectre agents, did what they did because Blofeld was Bond's jealous stepbrother with a daddy issue.
You came across me so many times, and yet you never saw me. Le Chiffre, Green, Silva.
All dead.
Yeah, that's right. A nice pattern developed. You interfered in my world, I destroyed yours.
If this was actually the plan all along, then there would have been subtle hints dropped in Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace that foreshadowed the events of Skyfall and Spectre. There are none. They are just going along with the Hollywood flavor of the month. With Quantum of Solace, it was Bourne. With Skyfall, it was The Dark Knight. With Spectre, it was Marvel, turning itself into an interconnected cinematic universe. It's a twist that retcons the long-running series into a familial soap drama. It's doubly worse if it is done for fan service. This quote,
It was all me, James. It's always been me, the author of all your pain.
is the perfect illustration of modern franchise filmmaking. Examples like the iconic hero and the villain suddenly having a connection with each other.
My name is Khan.
Or Mycroft. Or Sherlock. Oh, look at him. Didn't it ever occur to you, not even once, that Sherlock's secret brother might just be Sherlock's secret sister?
Or suddenly all the past installments written to be episodic, unrelated the hero went through or connected as one big scheme by this secret hidden family mastermind.
I want a name.
Wait, what? This, I'm tapping my table, this is where the problems begin. Right here. Everything in the entire universe of the show exists to set up the inevitable confrontation between Sherlock and Moriarty, who already knows about Sherlock and is playing games with him for fun from day one. It wasn't enough to have a one-off murder mystery where Sherlock figures out who the killer is and set a good tone, and then maybe have him come up in the future to deal with. The same thing happens again with the second episode. It starts out on the right foot with the opening setting up the characters for that episode, but then at the end, we get this scene where it turns out the villain also works for Moriarty, and he has her killed. Once again, this is completely unnecessary. Not everyone bad in the world has to turn out to be working for Moriarty.
Not that this can't be done well, but it is often a lame attempt at copying The Empire Strikes Back. It is almost a surefire way to alienate the fans and make your story feel like fanfic. Hell, even fanfictions today don't pull shit like this. Craig said Mike Myers fucked them because Bond couldn't do gags anymore because of Austin Powers, but the moment Spectre copied the twin twist, it killed Austin Powers by becoming a parody of itself. Craig wanted to retire with Spectre, but Broccoli persuaded him to do another movie, and they had to find a way to top the Bond retires ending. So we got No Time to Die, a movie that kills off James Bond. Although it is my second favorite Craig Bond movie, it is not good. Aside from how the second half stalls the exciting pacing and momentum, the attempts at flexing, we are trying meta and doing something new, didn't hit. The impact of Bond just retiring and living a normal life didn't land because we already saw it twice. MI6 doing shady shit didn't hit hard because we already saw worse with Silva. The ending comes across as a cringy soap drama attempt. If Spectre was their attempt at what Marvel was doing, No Time to Die was EON's Logan because EON didn't want to do a normal Bond adventure without copying another Hollywood trend. Oh, you killed Wolverine? Well, we are killing Bond. How about that? If anything, the movie is at best when it is just doing normal fun Bondian tropes, which is why the first half shines. But Bond can't just have a normal adventure without an attempt to be meta. He is 1. Not 007, 2. A rookie, 3. Goes rogue, 4. Flailing, 5. Retired, and 6. Dead. So, here is how I would restructure the Bond films. The limitation is that I am not able to change the story too much. I will have to keep the serialized nature to the Craig era. I believe a lot of problems could be solved by the different ordering. This is what the order of the Craig James Bond movies should have been. Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, standalone Bond film, Spectre, Skyfall. Casino Royale is perfect as it is. I'm confident that I will never see a better Bond movie. For Quantum of Solace, I'd link these 2 YouTube videos as to show how the movie could be improved. One of the biggest wastes of the Craig era is that he didn't have his standalone in his prime Bond movie. He didn't get to have his own Goldfinger or The Spy Who Loved Me, where Bond gets to do a normal job because his films came out at the time when connect, personalize, and serialize every series was the mantra of the industry due to The Dark Knight and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Craig Bond went from a reckless newbie to an old dog who needs to retire immediately without a normal middle Bond adventure to bridge. So much so that video games like Bloodstone and 00 Legends tried to fill that gap. This is where Craig is at his peak. Bond just doing his normal episodic mission as 007, without tying himself to a larger big bad organization. There are many non-Fleming books to adapt. Apparently, Raymond Benson's books are very much like the Bond films. I remember Devil May Care being hotly debated as the next Craig Bond entry. John Gardner's Scorpius could easily be changed into the modern War on Terror setting. This is also a place where you introduce Moneypenny and Q, and a bunch of cool gadgets and supercars for Bond to play with. Have Moneypenny as a Bond girl throughout the adventure, and then she gets hurt, and that injury leads to her retiring a field agent to a desk job. I inherently dislike the filmmakers attempting to serialize the Bond films, and we had a disastrous result. But if you want to do it, I believe Spectre and Skyfall should have switched their places. Just by this switch, the consequences that affect the overall story work way better. Because Spectre would have worked better as Bond in his prime, facing his ultimate arch-nemesis. Skyfall being nominated for 5 Academy Awards made EON delusional about making an Oscar Bond movie. They thought what made it successful was the legacy elements. Spectre's horrid twist and No Time to Die's ending exist because the filmmakers wanted to capitalize on Skyfall's success of self-reflection and mythologization. This is why Blofeld turns out to be Bond's stepbrother and Bond dies. Without Skyfall, both Spectre and No Time to Die would have been fun, dumb super spy movies. This post by user Jolopsist is a near-perfect rewrite of Spectre. No Blofeld, better romance, better third act, and better internal struggle within MI6. Bond is just a nuisance to Spectre. Blofeld's plan is to reprogram Bond's head with the drill and rewrite his brain into killing M when he returns to England, which will prove how unreliable field agents are and allow C to take over British intelligence. In the movie, when Q tells Bond that Spectre is Quantum in the middle of Spectre, it comes across as a shoehorned attempt to tie these two films despite the fact that it wasn't clearly planned. Instead, we get this weird retcon on how Quantum works. They had nothing to do with each other until the filmmakers decided to make them the same organization. Shit on Quantum of Solace all you want, but Spectre as a criminal organization is just such an outdated concept in today's world. It was already dated in the 60s. While Quantum as a cabal of multinational business interests working for mutual gain is more believable. The former would screw up enough somewhere that major powers would take them down while the latter would easily thrive within global capitalism. I do like how Quantum adapts Spectre in a more modern, grittier sense in the form of Quantum. This is what I wanted from the Craig-era Bond films. Take the old elements and modernize them in a proper way. So start the story with Bond trailing and investigating Quantum, a loose thread from Solace. This way, we have this constant progression from the previous films, rather than a surprise. And instead of Quantum secretly being Spectre all along, it should have been Blofeld swallowing Quantum after it was crippled by Bond in Quantum of Solace. In the meeting where Bond sneaks into where he first sees Blofeld, that's when Blofeld gains power within Quantum and renames it into Spectre. When Blofeld meets Bond, he mocks him with the fact that Bond indirectly helped him rise to power. If Skyfall was a response to the events in Spectre, then it would make more sense. The incident at MI6 in Spectre led to a public outcry and inquiry. C's actions have leaked the files about MI6 undercover agents, leading to the Istanbul chase. Remember a scene in Skyfall where Bond uses his presumed death to retire and lives with some other girl on the bed? It would have made way more sense if that girl was Madeline. Maybe the movie can have her in a minor role by having her tell Bond not to go back to London. Build upon the chemistry established previously. Already having Madeline established as his faithful lover means you can cut the creepy shower scene with Severine, which as time goes on will age, as well as the barn rape scene from Goldfinger and the blackmail sex scene from Thunderball. Imagine a police officer tasked with helping sex slavery victims escape their captors, and while the victim is reliant on his help, he takes advantage of it by suddenly barging into her shower unprompted. The classic Aston Martin DB5 reveal also makes more sense by placing Skyfall later in the chronology. In Casino Royale, Bond wins a DB5. It's a nice homage to Goldfinger, and that's pretty much it. In the movie Skyfall, it is revealed he kept it somewhere secret, and the MI6 didn't know about it. But then it is revealed it is a completely modified Bond car with all the identical gadgets and weapons from Goldfinger, and Bond is very well familiar with the DB5, knowing the weapons and functions inside out. But then M also knows about the ejector seat in the car, so it is not even that Bond modified the car in secret. When Skyfall was released, there were speculations that Bond was a Time Lord because of it. Then Spectre tried to retcon this by having Q tell Bond to bring the DB5 back in one piece, implying he made it for Bond, even though Bond didn't meet Q until Skyfall. What's going on here? If Q was introduced earlier into the chronology, it could have been implied that he modified the DB5 Bond one from Casino Royale. I always found Skyfall's climax to be boring. What separates good Bond stories and bad ones is wits, coming up with creative plans to outsmart the villains. Consider the best Bond films. License to Kill is about Bond fooling the villains to be employed in the drug cartel to destroy it from the inside. Goldfinger spends half of the film incarcerated and has Bond uncover the villain's plan from the inside. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a romance story and has Bond seducing the girls in the villain's lair to discover the plan. Casino Royale is a mind game where Bond tries to outsmart the villain in the poker. The core conceit of those films is not shooting the bad guys, but maneuvering high-stakes planning and intrigue. Bond uses a path other than violence to reach the goal. In the entirety of Skyfall, Bond is reactive, not proactive. What should have been the man with the golden gun style, best versus best, dual angle, is wasted on a terrible plan. There has never been a single moment where Bond outwits Silva and beats him at his own game. Instead of fleeing to somewhere safe, James and M decide to hide in his old Scottish farmhouse and meet some old janitor for the first time in decades, and after 10 seconds he goes, "Okay, I'll help you fight off the bad guys." They allow the literal army to come in full force and proceed to do Home Alone with guns. It kills the momentum of the story.
So I thought Skyfall was like, what, this whole movie's ending at a shootout at a cabin? This is a James Bond movie? Like, wannabe Straw Dogs bullshit. And like a fucking farmer is helping him out? This is like James Bond?
Yeah. Bond is the character who hates waiting. This entire mansion sequence slows to a halt. Does he have no one to trust as backup at this point? He decides to not bring anyone or anything else, like fancy gadgets or weapons. The whole sequence is so hollow that they wrote that dumb scene where Bond somehow gets more pissed off by the destruction of his car than the death of Severine he was supposed to protect, which he sat back and allowed to happen. Let's say, instead, with Madeline and Moneypenny established in the previous film, maybe the third act can incorporate them. In the Scotland part, it is revealed Silva has captured Madeline and is holding her as a hostage, threatening Bond to bring him out. Bond uses his wits and distracts Silva, while Moneypenny goes in to save Madeline. You could do some brainstorming to come up with fun scenarios. This adds more stakes and tension to the climax. Maybe Bond chooses to save Madeline over M, choosing a retirement. M's death in Skyfall would have been a better way to motivate Bond to retire with Madeline. He was already rugged and disillusioned with his worth as 007 by the start of the story, and his beliefs are confirmed with M dying. Then Bond's secret agent job inevitably put Madeline in danger, and she could die like M did. Also, by this point, Craig Bond has 5 films. We saw his peak. That's enough crazy adventures for his health. He is aged. He failed the test. Blofeld is in the cages. Spectre is no more. He got his new girlfriend Madeline. What else he can do for the country? This is the point where it does make sense to do a retirement movie. Skyfall has an aura of finality that even No Time to Die didn't have. It serves as a perfect end to Craig's era. It has all the meta elements in Bond's character arc, but it feels out of place in anything other than a final film. If you don't like No Time to Die, you can retire Craig completely here because it is the perfect final movie to end, alongside the tenure of Judi Dench's M. So that's been my idea for how the Craig era could have been great. If you ask me about what the next James Bond era should be, after Daniel Craig, I don't want to see any pretension to be meta, miserable, or deep. I can't help but feel Barbara Broccoli and her family care more about being Hollywood aristocrats who use James Bond as a springboard for that purpose rather than making a movie. I'd say they should go back to the standalone adventures. I don't even want to hear any mention of Spectre after No Time to Die.
What made the original stories so popular was the fact they were self-contained. Apart from a few scant references to other events or the year the story takes place, nothing connects the Sherlock Holmes stories to each other as a singular narrative. On top of that, Holmes and Watson don't change all that much as people over the course of all those stories. This was hugely beneficial to the impact of the work, because it meant that even though there were tons of stories, a person could get a complete narrative without the idea that they were missing too much if they read one of them. It also meant that since there wasn't a larger overarching plot that needed to be served by each individual story, they all had their own room to breathe. If all the dozens of stories had tied into each other, people would have got confused and bored, and it wouldn't have been as punchy as getting a series of short, complete stories that were all satisfying on their own.
Watch how Lupin III is still going strong, and they still manage to create fun, episodic stories that stand out. The series knows itself as a schlock and embraces the absurdity of the premise. I prefer the franchises that know that about themselves. Just rob off the continuation books, modernize them to the current setting, add action set pieces, and adapt them to the screen, like Ewan did with Fleming's books.